Thanks. Let's get started with the subject matter. So, as pointed out, I am here to give a talk on category theory, but the title of my talk did not include the word category, and in most of the abstract also we did not talk about it. We wanted to give a introduction to category theory, but the related topics are often referred to as introduction. So these topics are referred to as abstract nonsense. Yeah, and there is a good reason. I mean, I want to begin with this word abstract nonsense for good reason. They are abstract, and by themselves they are nonsense. That's a true statement, and yet they are very central to the pursuit of mathematics as is going on presently. Certainly in my area, I work in algebraic geometry. It is almost essential to get fluent with this language. So the point is that so why are they abstract? Well, abstract is something easy to understand, but why is it nonsense? The reason it is nonsense is that by itself category theory has no power. By itself category theory is just a language. It's just a set of tools, and they are like founded in such abstraction that they in such limited in such rarefied medium they are founded that they can have little to do. It is they come alive when you put them to actual use, when you start using them in topology, when you start. So topology was the main motivating fact why these language was invented in the first place, but it found a profound use in algebraic geometry, for example, and now it has permeated almost all areas. It has helped us express concepts which are much deeper and not so obvious, and that is the kind of thing which I want to talk about in this talk. But let me not assume that you all are familiar with categories. So let me begin with a definition. These definitions are quite simple to make. So let me define category. And you will see there is not much to the definition. And yeah, so what is a category? Category is, so you are given. So, okay, so let me use some, sorry. Yeah. So let's say a category C is the following data. You are given objects of C. Okay. Now let me say that a class of objects. I'm being slightly careful here. I'm not using the word set, but you can assume this is almost same as sets. Okay. Sorry, a set of object. This is not exactly a set, simply because you run into foundational difficulties when you talk about set of all sets. That is not a set, right? I mean, this is something you might have already seen. Russell's paradox comes into play. So to avoid those kind of foundational difficulties, it is not assumed that the collection of all objects forms a set. It is rather just a well-defined collection, and that is what a class is. Okay, and given so this is one set of data. The second is for any two objects A, B in this given collection. Well, A and B may even be same. We are given a set. So here I can use set, a set of morphisms. So it's just a set, and that set is called a set of morphisms. The elements in that set are called as morphisms, a set of morphisms. And the notation that is often used, there are several notations which are used. So you either write home AB, so homomorphisms from A to B. You can also write home CAB to specify that you are working in the category C. And the most comfortable, yeah. Someone is saying something? Yeah, I'm okay. Now these things fail at the apt moment, it seems. Just give me a minute. So is my presentation visible? There was a technical glitch.
Yeah, it is visible, sir.
Okay, it is visible. Okay, so let's yeah, there is some problem that is happening. I'm not able to scroll efficiently. Anyway, it doesn't matter. We'll yeah. Okay. Why am I not able to scroll? Okay, this should work. We'll do this. So we have these two things, and then you demand some obvious maps. So objects should be thought of as your objects of study, and these morphisms are like morphisms which transform from one object to another. So they transform from A to B, and therefore there is also the following data for all triples of object A, B, C. You are also given functions. So remember, this is a set, and this denotes product set. So you are given a product function which is just as composition. So remember, element here, a morphism in yeah, I don't know, there is something is problem. Anyway, we'll see. Okay, so this should be thought of as F comma G mapping to G composed with F. Okay, this is this map. This is the composition of these two transitions. Okay, but you need slightly, so this collection of data to satisfy some properties, and the first property it has to satisfy is, so remember, not any pair of two morphisms are composable. You are composable only when okay, so let me use some diagram. So usually this is how F belonging to home AB is denoted, and you can compose. So this is called as head of F. This is called as tail of F, and you can compose only if tail of F matches with head of G, right? B is also head of G, and so then implies you can get a composite which is denoted as G composed with F. This is how it is denoted. The head of arrow denotes the transformation is happening from this place to this place. This is just a language, so there is nothing here, right? And then this should satisfy two properties. So the first property it should satisfy is associativity. F composed with G composed with H is F composed with G composed with H. Of course, assuming that this composition is defined. If this composition is not defined, if one side does not make sense, the other side would not make sense, and vice versa. And in that case, this equality does not make sense. But whenever this is defined, this happens. The second thing you want is that for all objects A, there is a distinguished identity map. This is just a technical requirement. Identity map in, well, the notation we are using is CAA. Oh, I've not introduced this notation. Sorry, I got distracted here. So these two are used, but a very efficient notation is just to use CAB. Skip the word home entirely. That simplifies life in notation wise, so that's what I'll use. So there is an identity map from A to A, and it is identity in the following sense, that ID such that ID A composed with F is F whenever F is composable with ID A, and similarly F composed with ID A is F for all. Yeah, I mean, I'm not writing the full thing. I mean, for all F which are composable with IDA. Okay, so this is just definition. I don't want to spend too much time on definition, but it's quite elementary if you think about it. You are given a collection of objects, and then you are given how to transform from one object to another. Between two objects, there can be several homomorphisms. There may be several ways of going from one object to another, and then you are, well, if you can transform from A to B, and then you can transform from B to C, then the composite should be thought of as a transform from A to C. And given any object A, there is an identity transformation which basically does nothing on A. That's the intuition we are working with, and these are the formal definitions. Okay, so having made these formal definitions, let's see some examples. So let's begin with some examples. We'll begin with very simple examples. Well, this picture represents a category, meaning object of this. So let's say C equal to this. Object of C is just a singleton set, singleton collection in this case. So it's just denoted by this set. And now if you are going to demand morphisms, there is only one object. So you have to demand only morphisms from here to here. And this set is nothing but IDA. Okay, so there is only one object and there is only one morphism, identity. And then it can be seen that identity composed with identity will be defined to be identity because of these reasons. And now the composition is also defined and everything will go through. So this is quite a trivial category. Here is another category. So this is how it is usually drawn. So this, let's say this is object 1, this is object 2, and then you have a morphism between them F. Of course, you need identity morphism. So this is ID of 1 and this is ID of 2. So more formally written, object C is a 2 set. Yeah. C11 is just ID 1. C12 is a set singleton F. And C22 is just ID2. But these are cumbersome notations. This picture clarifies what it is. Yeah, you are just given two objects. There are two dots, and then there are and then there are these ways to transform. One goes to 1 by identity, 2 goes to 2 by identity, and 1 transforms to 2 by some transformation which we call as F. Yeah, so this is also a category, and then you can artificially construct categories. So instead of 1, you could have put 2. Yeah, so this is F and G, and then of course you need identity, and this is also identity. So this will also form a category. I'll not write what it is as sets. So you see, finite directed graphs with some additional property. You need composition to be defined, but finite directed graphs with some additional property do form a category. And it is this rarefied a medium, right? These are kind of trivial examples. How can they encode anything deeper in mathematics? But the point is, this is all there is to category theory. Most definitions would also work in this context. So these are some way trivial examples, right? Let us move away from trivial examples and let us give examples which encode mathematical structure. Examples which encode mathematical structure. Okay, mathematical structure. So a set gives rise to a category in two different ways. One is this. One is the example we saw. We have two objects. Let me call them A and B. Of course, we'll need IDA and IDV. And between them, I have S belonging to, so S a set, then you have a category corresponding to the set, S belonging to S. Okay. So in other words, home AB is the set S. Now, you don't have to compute the elements of this set with anything other than identity, right? Because the head of, so if you are looking at something which has tail A, that's only identity. Similarly, if you are looking something which has head B, then there is only identity. If you are looking something with tail A, then it's only identity. So you have to only compute with identity, and you know what to do when you compute something with identity. You get the same thing back. So this encodes a category in a rather obvious way. But this is, well, this is true, but this is not so useful. A more useful description, which is actually more natural also. So this is called as discrete category. So the objects have no relationship whatsoever is what essentially one is saying. So for each element of the set, you have an object here, and then you have just the identity morphisms. So in other words, what we are saying is object of C is the set S, and home of S1, S2. Remember, S1, S2 belong to S now. They are objects. Is empty if S1 not equal to S2. Singleton IDS if S1 equal to S2 and is therefore called as S. Yeah. So this is a discrete category. So you remember, home sets can be empty. There may be no way to transform from one object to another. You must be allowed to transform to yourself by identity, but there is no reason why you are able to transform from one object to another. And this is what a set is often represented as, a discrete category. Elements of set are like objects, but there is no relation between the objects. There is nothing that tells us how to transform from one object to another. This is quite a natural category which occurs in various places. Let me just finish by giving one more example. G, a group. Okay, G, a group, not necessarily a billion. Then you have a category CG, which can be defined as follows. So this is the singleton, and then you have G belonging to G. Yeah, so remember, a group also has identity, so I don't have to write identities separately. So in other words, objects of CG are nothing but a singleton, and home between singleton is G. And now I have to tell you what the composition is. Now it's no longer just composing with identities. A non-trivial composition will happen, but then you have the group structure, right? So you have G, comma H maps to, right? This, let's say this. So this can be thought of as home star star cross home star star, and this is also home star star, right? So this group structure gives you a map from this to this, and this is what the composition map is. Okay, so this is rather these are rather trivial ways to represent mathematical structures from them, but this this is done. Sometimes it leads to some way to encode some data which you had difficulty with otherwise, but that's not the most common use of category. So these are also some way artificial examples. Let me begin with giving another class of examples, which is most natural. So let me say natural examples. And this is the class of examples which we'll focus on, and eventually talk about some applications of category theory in this context. So what are natural examples? Okay. Collection of all sets forms a category. Okay. So what is this category? The category is objects C. A belongs to object C is same as saying A is a set. Well, this is one reason why objects were not made into a set. After all, the set of all sets does not exist. That leads to Russell's paradox. But nevertheless, we can talk about a collection of all sets, and that is so that is what we are interested in. So this is the definition of objects. Finally, what is home AB? Home CAB. This is functions from A to B. Okay, that's a natural transformation from one set to another. You have to give me a function. A function is what takes one set to another. That's the definition of a function in some ways, right? So this forms a category, and this is what is the motivating reason why you have categories in some prominence. But this kind of thing can be done with most situations, right? So you can have category of groups. So objects are groups, and morphisms are now group homomorphisms. Okay, you can have category of vector spaces. Objects are vector spaces, and the morphisms are linear transformations. Now, how do you transform one vector space to another? Through a linear transformation. How do you go from one group to another? Through a group homomorphism. So these transformations, yeah, so these things also form a category. Okay, and it's obvious, right? I mean, you can compose two linear transformations, you will still get a linear transformation. If you compose two group homomorphisms, you still get a group homomorphism. From a group to itself, there is an identity homomorphism which does act as an identity, right? So these things are quite obvious. There is not much to saying that these are categories. But remember, on one extreme, you have trivial categories like these. Okay, this prevents us from having too many generalities true in category theories by themselves. Okay, on the other extreme, we have rich categories like this. So whatever generalities are going to be true can have consequences because these are also categories, and that is in some sense the way a category theory connects these various objects. And the way this talk will function is now that we have discussed some examples and definitions, we'll just talk about a lot of examples and see category theory in practice. Okay, so let me first examples. So these are all examples where category theories have played a critical role in either understanding, in either simplifying the proofs which were known, or they help you to actually construct objects which were otherwise just not possible. So we'll see all varieties of examples. Let's begin with some very simple examples, and let me talk about products. Specifically, I want to talk about in topological spaces. Okay. So what are products? Well, given two sets, x1, x2 sets, we know what do we mean by x1, x2 product set, right? Given x1, x2 vector spaces, we know what do we mean by x1 cross x2 as a vector space. Given x1, x2 as groups, we also have a definition of what is x1, x2 as a group, right? Of course, even in topological spaces, this happens. Topological space, we talk about product. So product topological space, right? So these products, and in each case, without category theory, in each case we are defining them individually, right? We know how to define topological space. So you first define that, okay, the underlying set is the product of the underlying sets, and then you define what is the product topology. Similarly, for groups, product groups is a product of two groups. As a set is the underlying set, product of underlying sets, but then you have to define what is the multiplication. Similarly, for vector spaces, you define the product, but then you have to define the addition by hand. It turns out in language of categories, this has a unified view. Okay, so let me just write down this view. So let C be a category. I'll make this general definition, and in each of these cases, it will capture what the product of two objects is. So x1 be one object in the category, x2 be another object in the category. Okay, so these are the two objects whose product you are trying to define. And okay, so just a minute, let me take more space, otherwise, yeah. Okay, C be a category, and then we have x1 and x2 are two objects whose product we are trying to define. So P is said to be the product if it comes with two maps, projections P1 and P2. So think about it. Think about the model case of x1, x2 being sets. So this is by definition x comma y, x belongs to x1, y belongs to x2, and the product map to x1, for example, will be xy mapping to x. Okay, so it is an object which comes equipped with these two maps. See, that's all we can say in a category theory, right? We can say that product has to be an object, right? And it has to satisfy certain properties, but all we have got for something to satisfy is the morphisms that either come to it or map from it. And it turns out that there is a definition of product in this rarefied medium also. So such that for all Q and maps Q2 X2 Q2 and Q2 X2 Q1. So let me use a slightly different color. So this is part of data. Product is a map, is an object with two maps, such that if you are given any object Q, and such that whenever this happens, sorry, this is Q2. Whenever this happens, then there exists a unique map such that so this map, let me say, is, well, eta, okay, such that P2 composed with eta is Q2 and P1 composed with eta is Q1, okay. So what is one saying? Let me just elaborate a bit. What one is saying is that this object comes with two projections. If there is any other object which comes with two projections, right? Q comes with two projections, Q1 and Q2. Then these projections, Q1 and Q2, are derived from projections of P, which are P1 and P2, via a unique map eta. So this relation holds. This is what derives the projections Q1 and Q2 via the unique map eta. Okay, so this is definition of a project, of a product. So such an object will be called as a product. Now, by the way, there is no guarantee that such an object exists. For example, we have seen really rarefied categories, right? We have seen categories like this. In a category like this, products may not exist. In a category like this, well, product may not exist. Okay, so so the natural question is not about, it does not say anything about do products exist or not, but it allows us to tell what a product is. So once you have this definition in place, it is not hard to verify that for sets x1 cross x2 mapping to the projections we wrote down, right? These two projections actually form a product. For topological spaces, for groups, for vector spaces, for all these cases, this is a unified definition of what a product is. So this is a pedagogical advantage. It's not essential. You could have replicated definition of product in every situation you are going to work with, but this allows you to give a unified definition, and it's a definition which is going to motivate new products in new collection of objects you are going to work with. Okay. Now let me just say one more thing, and that is where a slight glimpse of the power comes into play. Yeah. So so in topological spaces, okay. So first let me say, not necessary to talk about two objects. Yeah, it's not necessary to talk about just two objects. You can take arbitrarily many. Meaning, if I have to define product of, so if xi are some collection of objects, if I have to define product of xi, it will be a object P with maps to each xi, yeah, all ij, yeah. So this is pi pj, such that it is universal for this, just as in the previous sense. Whenever you are given another object which tries to mimic this, having maps to all pi and pj, there exists a unique eta, such that eta, yeah, I'm written correctly. Okay, so pi composed with eta is qi. Okay, so it's not necessary to have just two objects. You can work with arbitrary objects. This definition makes sense. Existence is a different question. Whether such a product exists in the category or not, I'm not claiming that. But this definition entirely makes sense. Now here is an interesting thing. Sorry, let me work with this. In topological spaces, recall what was definition of product topology on an infinite collection, right? Product topology. It was defined in somewhat unnatural way. It was defined in the following way, that open sets of the form x1, x2, xi hat, instead of some finitely many xi, you have ui, xj hat, uj, and so on. So replace finitely many xi hat by open sets ui in xi. It was not defined as product of open sets, as sets. It was said that except for finitely many places, you have to take the full set, and only at those finitely many places you are allowed to have some open subset of the corresponding term, right? This, if it seems unnatural, it was made first in topology for natural reasons in topology, but this is the correct object that satisfies the set property. So of course, this object has projections onto pi, and this is what satisfies the set property. It is the yeah. So remember, we have this property of products. This is what defines the product P, and this defines the product in any topological space, in any category. So here this will be topological spaces, and this will be a topological space. These will be continuous maps. Yeah, topological spaces with continuous maps form a category, and then whenever you are given another object with continuous maps like this, including the one where the open sets are ui cross product of uis, where uis are open in each xi, then you will get a unique map like this. Okay, but not the other way around, from this object to this product ui. Okay, so what I'm saying is that if you are given product xi with open sets product ui versus product xi with open sets as we wrote, meaning ui at finitely many places, then there is a map in this direction, which is eta, but there does not exist a map in this direction. So this is the property that gives you the product. So in some ways it explains, yeah, in some ways it explains what the natural product in topological spaces is. So that's a pedagogical use which goes beyond just the obvious. It tells you, it helps you to choose the correct object, the correct topological space which should be thought of as the product. Well, this idea actually continues for many things. So you have, so let me write down list of concepts which have general definition. You have products, you have direct sums, you have, so you have, with some additional definitions, even tensors, and so on and so forth. Okay, so all these objects have general definitions, and they are realized in specific context to specific objects. They exist or not is a separate problem. We show that they exist, but once they exist, they are completely defined by this property. What does this completely defined means? In fact, that is another application of category theory. So let me give another example. So let me now give another example, and this will illustrate a different kind of use of category theory. So let's take a field. Yeah, let's take a field. Let me say real numbers, right? And inside real numbers sits inside complex numbers. This is algebraic closure of R. In general, a field K sits inside this algebraic closure. Okay, this is true. This is one kind of inclusion. There is another kind of inclusion. You take a metric space, okay, and call it X, let's say, and metric space X sits inside X bar, which is its completion. This is another kind of inclusion. Now, here is a very interesting fact. Given real numbers, given a field K, is K bar unique? Yeah. So, well, it turns out yes. Given real numbers, there is only one algebraic closure. It's complex numbers. Given any field K, there is only one algebraically closed field. There is a unique algebraically closed field, which is finite, which is algebraic over K. So that is what its algebraic closure is, right? Same thing is true for completion also. There is a unique complete metric space in which the given metric space is dense, right? So that's what completion is. But these two situations are fundamentally different. Actually, they are not similar. And let me give you an example. Suppose I give you R to C an algebraic closure, yeah, and suppose I construct algebraic closure in some known way. So one way is to adjoin a root of this, yeah, okay. Now can you tell me X is plus I or minus I? You cannot. There is nothing that will tell you, although these two things are isomorphic, although both, this is also complex numbers, but there are two isomorphisms between them. These are the identity map and the conjugation map. Okay, there are two morphisms between them such that this diagram commutes. Okay, and on the other hand, for metric space, this is not true. If I construct metric space in some particular way, say, let's say by Cauchy, so I construct this via Cauchy sequences. Remember, constructions in mathematics are in some sense a choice. There are several different ways you can construct completion of a metric space. You can construct it by Cauchy sequences. You can also take so you can embed this metric space into a larger metric space and then take its larger complete metric space and take its closure. There are several different completions, and in any case, there is a unique map like this. Okay, even though complex number is isomorphic to complex number, you do not know it is isomorphic via identity or conjugation. There is no way you can tell what does X go to. Does it go to I plus I or does it go to minus I? On the other hand, whatever way you construct, there may be two different ways you construct your completion. Let's say you constructed this by Cauchy sequences and this you constructed by taking closed. So X was naturally given to you inside Y complete, and then you just took X closure. Okay, closure of X in Y. In this picture, you are able to actually give a unique map from Cauchy, this completion to this completion. These two situations are fundamentally different. The way we write it is that algebraic closure of a field is unique. That we know. There is only one algebraic closure, but not, and this is a funny phrase, makes sense only in mathematics, not uniquely unique. The way it is unique, yeah. So one algebraic closure you constructed by Rx by x square plus 1. There is another algebraic closure you can construct by Rx by x square plus 2. That also will give you an algebraic closure. Take any quadratic polynomial whose root does not lie in R. That will give you a degree 2 extension of R, and that will give you an algebraic closure. But the map between these are not clear. X may go to root 2 times X, or X may go to minus root 2 times X. There are two maps, right? So even though it's unique, the way it is unique is not unique. So it is not uniquely unique. On the other hand, X closure and the other X completion for X metric space, this is uniquely unique. There is a unique map which connects the two, uniquely unique. Okay. This concept is clarified through category theory. This is much clearer through category theories. And I mean, if you think about it, what is happening is that well, I've not talked about functors, but completion gives rise to a functor. On the other hand, algebraic closure does not give rise to a functor at all. And that is the reason why, I mean, this is one way to express that this is different from this concept. So let me just say one more line about this example. This is a fundamental pedagogical use of category theory. It clarifies the notion of equality. After all, even if you take a simple equality like 2 plus 2 equal to 4, what do you even mean by these two things being equal? Left hand side, so let me also say this as example. So what do you mean by these two sides being as equal? This side has 3 characters, this side has just 1 character, right? If you are writing a C program, let's say, this will take different memory space, this string will take different memory space. You are in some ways focusing on certain properties which allow you a transformation from 2 plus 2 to 4, which is addition. And there is a transformation from 4 to 2, which is decomposition. Yeah. That is what is allowing you to say that the fact that there is a unique such transformation in an appropriate category. I've not written down what that appropriate category is. It's called the category of arithmetic. You take objects as all arithmetic expressions and put a morphism between them if the evaluation of them are equal. That's what the category is. So that is what gives rise to this equality. But sometimes it may be useful to say that this equality can occur in many, many different ways. And that, for example, in algebraic closure, right? There are these two things are isomorphic, but in 2 different ways. And that is an added information which was often missed before category theory was in prominence. That added information leads to added development in mathematics. And let me give you an example, which I hope if you have seen topological spaces, you would have seen this through a messy calculation, but let me give you a simple calculation using category theory. Yeah, so for this, I will need to define something. Let me define a functor. Okay, so, well, functor is very easy to define. Let C be a category and D be a category. Functor F from C to D is something which takes objects to objects. So this map is written as A going to FA. It takes morphisms to morphisms. So it gives rise to a map which takes A to FA. It's a map between 2 collections. And this also gives rise to a corresponding map between 2 morphisms. So this is the F written as F going to FF. So these 2 sides are sets. This is a function between 2 sets. This is a map of 2 collections. So it goes, so this is the data such that it respects the structure of category. So such that F composed with G is FF composed with FG, and F of ID A for all A is ID of FA for all A in op C. Okay. So somehow it tells you how to take objects to objects, how to take morphisms to morphisms. It is a so for example, take a example. So let's just quickly do an example before we turn to the main example of functor of this talk. Yeah. So example of functor. So given given what is an example of functor? Well, given so remember we had a category of groups. Let me call this group, right? The objects are groups, the morphisms are group homomorphisms, and then there is a category of sets. Let me call this as set. There is a natural functor from group to sets, which is the forgetful functor. It just forgets the group structure. So it takes the group G to the set G. Group G is the set G plus some additional data. It is the additional binary operation on G which satisfies some properties. Let's forget the binary operation. Then a group homomorphism is just a function between the corresponding underlying sets which satisfy some properties, right? So therefore, whenever you are given a group G to H, a homomorphism f from G to H, this will map to map on the underlying sets. We'll forget the group binary operator. Yeah. And if you forget the binary operator, there is no restriction on the map now, but it came with a certain restriction to begin with, but we have forgotten what that restriction is. Doesn't matter. It still gives you a function from the underlying set G to H, and that is another example of a functor. Sorry, this is an example of a functor, but we can also do this with topological spaces to sets. You forget that topological space has a topology. It is a set with a collection of subsets called as topology. Let's forget that collection of subset and then take the topological set to just the set itself. That gives rise to a functor, and so on and so forth. These are somewhat trivial examples, but it turns out that in mathematics, there are a lot of non-trivial examples of functors. In fact, most important constructions you make, for example, completion of a metric space, they occur as functors. So, for example, there is a functor from metric spaces to complete metric spaces, which takes X to its completion. Okay, X to its completion. This is a functor. Whenever you are given a map from X to Y, you can construct a map from X bar to Y bar. That's what verifying that it is a functor amounts to verifying. There exists a unique map giving F. There exists unique F. You can extend the map uniquely to the completions, right? There are other examples. So in topological spaces, you have seen this, hopefully, that from topological spaces to groups, there is a functor called fundamental group. It takes a topological space. It produces the fundamental group of topological space. And given a continuous map from T to T prime, there is a continuous map from pi1 T to pi1 T prime, right? Whenever you have a morphism of two topological spaces which is continuous, you get a continuous map which will write as pi1F from pi1 T to pi1 T prime, which is a group map, okay? This is also a functor. So this requires verification, but that's not a hard verification. That is something you would have seen if you have seen the first thing about fundamental group, okay? So continuous maps gives rise to group homomorphism between topological spaces. Now let me come to a non-trivial result of topology, which is a theorem, and let me write it. What does this theorem says? This theorem says that if T is a topological group, then pi1 T is abelian, okay? And I'll give a very quick proof using category theory. So what does topological group mean? Topological group means that T is a group and the group operations are compatible with the maps of topological spaces, so that they're continuous. So this is the group multiplication. This is the function AB going to AB. The group multiplication is continuous. Similarly, we know that T going to T, A mapping to A inverse is continuous. Okay, and in such a situation, it turns out that pi1 T is abelian. Now, if you have seen a proof of this, this is something which is done usually elementarily. The usual proof involves looking into the topological space, constructing some loops, constructing homotopy between A composed with B is homotopic to B composed with A. You know, so it involves a detailed set of operations. It turns out none of these operations are essential for this fact to hold. This is a completely general fact, which just follows from the fact that this is a group and pi1 is a function. Nothing more is needed. So let me prove this. Let me prove this entirely using the language of category theory. So first of all, observe this. These are all maps, continuous maps. So the maps are A mapping to A comma 1, and this is U comma V mapping to UV. And under, so let me call this as This is called as I1. And this is the multiplication map M. So let me call this as M. And if you think about it, this is just the identity map. After all, A maps to via I1 to A comma 1, and then it maps to via M to A dot 1. One is the group in T, group identity in T, and this is just A. So A maps to A in the composite. This is the continuous map, which takes A to A. So therefore, it is identity of T. Okay, this is one diagram. Yeah, see, this kind of ideas are called as diagram chasing, because usually we are just writing in terms of diagram. Let me write another diagram. T going to I2, and you might have already guessed what I2 is. It is A mapping to 1 comma A. Okay, and this is just M. For same reason, this is also commutative, and this is also identity. So okay, in categorical language, what do we have? We have two maps, I1, I2 to T cross T, and then we have a map to T, which is multiplication, and then we have a map identity T, and then we have that M followed by I1 is identity T, and then we have M followed by I2 is identity T. Okay, this is something we know. Now what we'll do, we'll just apply the functor pi1 on this diagram. Okay, and each of these maps will now become group operations. Pi1T to pi1 T cross T to T pi1T, and this is just so identity functor takes identity to identity. So this is just identity of pi1T. There are two maps, and then this is just pi1M. So let me also call this as capital M and call this as J1, J2. Let's try to understand J1 and J2 slightly better. We have pi1 T cross T. So if you have studied fundamental groups, you know that this is isomorphic to pi1 T cross pi1 T as a group. And then the inclusion T to T cross T I1 actually includes the inclusion pi1 T J1. So this is the map G. So let me write it more clearly. So this induces the map pi1 I1, which is by definition J1, equal to so this is equal to the map G mapping to G comma 1 pi1 T maps to pi1 T cross T, which is identified with pi1 T cross pi1 T. Okay, so this is the, so we are trying to map fundamental group of T to fundamental group of T cross T, but we know that fundamental group of T cross T is product of fundamental group of T and fundamental group of T, and then the map just becomes G goes to G comma 1. This is what J1 becomes. Okay, this is something that is very, very easy to prove again in elementary topology, and this is the way to prove that product of pi1 of A cross B is pi1 A cross pi1 B. In the proof of this fact, this is implicit that the inclusion A to A cross B induces the inclusion pi1 A to pi1 A cross pi1 B. Now let's look at this diagram again. Let me change the color and just write it here itself. Let us look at this diagram again. This is nothing but, sorry, what happened? Let me, and this is nothing but pi1 T cross pi1 T. Okay. Now let's take two elements A and B here, and let us look at what does AB goes to and what does BA goes to. Okay, so okay, so well, can I? Okay, let me draw this again, and it will take just 5 minutes, I suppose. pi1 T cross pi1 T. I apologize, I may go 5 minutes over time. This is J1, this is J2, this is M, and this is identity, right? And let's take two elements in the group, and we are trying to verify that this group is abelian. We want to show that AB is same as BA. So let's take J1 of A, right? This is nothing but A comma 1, right? what is J2 of B? This is nothing but 1 comma B. Okay. So what is J1 of A times J2 of B? That is happening in this group. So this is nothing but A comma 1 equal times 1 comma B equal to A comma B. Okay. Similarly, J2 of, so let me switch the order now. Let me let me take J2 of B and J1 of A. What is this? That is also 1 comma B times A comma 1, but in this group this is same thing, right? It is still A comma B. So now I apply M to both these equations. I apply M. Yeah. So okay. So this is 1 and this is 2, and 1 and 2 imply J1A times J2B is same as J2B times J1A. And now I apply M. So you get M of J1A J2B is M of J2B J1A. But remember, M is a morphism in the category of groups. Pi1 was a functor from topological spaces to groups. So this becomes a group morphism, and therefore M is a group morphism. So M of XY is same as MX MY. So this becomes MJ1 of A times MJ2 of B. And this is nothing but MJ2 of B times MJ1 of A. But remember, MJ1 is just identity. So this becomes AB is same as BA. Okay, since MJ1 is identity. So remember, so why is that? MJ1 is nothing but pi1 of small m composed with pi1 of I1, which is same as by functor property of pi1, I1, but this is same as pi1 of identity of T, but again by functor property, this is ID of pi1 T. Okay, so MJ1 is just identity. Similarly, MJ2 is just identity. So this is identity, this is identity, takes A to A, this takes A to A, and you just get AB equal to B. So the, what looked like a topological fact that you have to dig into what the topological space T looks like, turns out to be completely encoded in the fact that the fundamental group pi1 is a functor that this is a topological group. So the product morphism is happening in is a continuous map. T cross T to T is a continuous map, and then we have at one place used the fact that pi1 T cross T is same as pi1 T cross pi1 T. It turns out even this can be proved topologically with minor inputs from topology, but due to lack of time, we'll not do this here today. And this is another example in which the category theory has just come alive. I'll just take one more minute to mention that the kind of examples we did today are all non-essential. Non-essential in the following sense, that they have alternative proofs. They have alternative proofs which do not rely on category theory. So one may wonder that, well, it is a very useful tool in the sense that it makes our calculations more efficient, but then maybe we can avoid category theory and just not deal with it. If we are not comfortable with it, we may have longer ways to reach the same arguments, but we'll nevertheless reach the same argument. It turns out, and I had prepared some examples, but we don't have enough time today, that there are situations in which categories are fundamentally needed. They are not merely some appendages to prove. They are not some simplifications of ideas. They are actually, we are working in actually a situation where, beginning with a category, you are constructing a new category, and the calculation is possible only in the new category. So if you don't have that language, there is no idea of a new category, and then there is no calculation that can take place. One of those situations you are actually familiar with, think about simplicial cohomology and singular cohomology of a topological space. In both the cases, the way you compute the simplicial cohomology and singular cohomology is by computing first a long complex, chain complex, which you call as simplicial chain complex, and similarly for singular case, you call it singular chain complex. And then you compute the cohomology of this chain complex, homology or cohomology, doesn't matter. Homology of this chain complex or cohomology of this chain complex, you compute, and that is what is called a simplicial and singular cohomology. And then there is a proof which shows that simplicial cohomology is same as singular cohomology. But it turns out that so if you restrict it to cohomology itself, it is a weaker statement. There is a slightly more richer statement lurking around that these chain complexes are almost the same. Well, they are not quite the same. Just their cohomology is the same. We know that simplicial complexes are finite. Usually, they are spanned by each term is a finite vector space. On the other hand, singular chain complex, if you take each term is an infinite vector space, infinite dimensional vector space. Yet there is a way to identify these complexes up to quasi-isomorphisms, which captures more information than just saying their cohomology is equal. But how do you say that? To say that, you effectively construct a new category where the objects are isomorphic under some trickier situation, and you end up saying that the chain complex is actually a functor. The cohomology is actually a functor from the topological space to this space. It's a derived functor of something. So that is an essential use of category theory. You cannot get away from that use. That is also something you should keep in mind, but we'll not discuss that example today. I'll stop. If you have any questions, please do ask. And I apologize for overshooting by 3 minutes. Yeah, thank you.